Islam, Islam, Islam. Welcome to Moorish Heritage and History School, MHHSI Wide Open blog talk program. We haven't actually got an actual name for this, but it has to be something with reading. What it is for now, because I trust we'll read other books, is we're reading White Cargo, and we're at chapter 10. So I want to do something that's slightly different, like a little cap up. And I was looking for a stem. I know everyone is starting to read first, but I want to see if the stem, if he's on the line, could press 1. I'm not sure what number he's on today. And he would press 1. And I don't see him pressing 1 yet. Well, out there. Brother Asem, are you with us? Brother Asem, are you there?
Yes, it's on.
Islam, how are you today?
All is well. All is well.
So can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear very well.
All right, I'm glad that I'm good with my electronic apparatus. You know, Mercury always messes with me with electronics. I didn't ask you about this, but I know that you have been like on this from the time that Sister Anna Eve started it with, and I'm sure there's others as well. But you did a presentation last time. And what I wanted to do this time, because we're at chapter 10, so before I start reading it, I just wanted to do a short, like, cap off. I wanted to just mention each chapter so far, and if you could just do a brief on, like, I know, if that's all right with you, I'm just going to read them down real quick to where we are.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Because, well, we all know that a place for the unwanted was, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the Slavic, modern Europeans, who were slaves, and they just didn't know what to do with them. They were just unwanted everywhere. That's chapter 1. That's pretty much capped up, I believe. Is there something you want to add to that in that chapter, or does that pretty much sum it up?
Pretty much sum it up in chapter 1.
All right. Now, chapter 2 is the judge's dream. I imagine that's been trying to figure out how to make cargo, I guess, out of them before they send them across the way. Because chapter 3 is the merchant prince. Do you have any comments on that?
Hold up. Oh, chapter 3. Okay.
Chapter 2. Well, chapter 2 is the judge's dream, and then it goes into chapter 3. So those two, which is the merchant prince. I think chapter 2, the judge's dream, is they were making cargo out of them, and then using them for merchandise would lead into the merchant prince, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. All right. Yeah. Chapter 2. Well, how they was making cargo out of them, who came first, as far as bringing them, setting the stage for bringing them to America.
Okay.
And then moving into the Merchant Prince, well, what I do, I just break it down, like you said, through the table of content.
Well, that's it. Well, I wrote them down already. I wrote them down already. Just for, I can read them to you and you can go through it. I got them written down. We've covered 1, 2, and 3. 1 is, of course, the place for the unwanted. That's the Slavic, modern Europeans today that were slaves, born as slaves. They're Slavic. And then, they were unwanted, like what to do with them. So then we go to 2, where they're trying to somehow legally, not necessarily lawfully, figure out how to make cargo out of them. And then that leads into chapter 3, which is the merchant prince, and then that was where they were taking them to different places, and they were literally working as slaves. And then chapter 4, I'll just read 4, 5, and 6. Children of the city is 4. The jagged edge is 5, and they are not dogs is 6. How do you cap those 3 up?
Yeah. Okay, so go back to merchant prince, and I follow what you're saying. I'm sorry, it took me a minute. Yeah. So in chapter 3, it was also who would be leading the adventures up, also, which is what was important too, because how they painted the picture of Humphrey, and then how they painted the picture of Sir Ralph de Raleigh, and I found it was very important to understand that, because a lot of times today we hear those names, Sir Ralph de Raleigh, and they glamorize them, but those dudes was real murderers and things like that. But and how the things that they did when they got on the land, right? So then in chapter 4, it gives you an idea of how brutal they were, and I was thinking about this too. It gives you an idea how brutal they were with let's call them white slaves, or these European slaves, and the way they dealt with the children and things like that. And you would think, not only because of and this is modern, but even back then, how they dealt with slave labor with the children and things like that, and they must have continued that all the way up into like real recent times. Mm-hmm. The slave labor, even for their own people. It's funny. I was watching this movie of the Irish, and how they had all these the women and the children in the factories doing all this here type of work. Now of course back then there wasn't no factories. They was doing all this planting and building and things like that, but it still was the same brutal treatment of the children, and they didn't even care.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
They didn't even care. And then what that takes us into
Children of the City 4. The next would be the Jagged Edge, and They Are Not Dogs, which is 5 is Jagged Edge, 6 They Are Not Dogs. And I think you kind of covered that, because they treated them like that. They treated them terrible.
Right, but now also it shows how they do one thing and they say another. For instance, you see even today when they go into passing laws and things, they set this here propaganda bull crap into the minds of the average person, into the minds of the layman people, knowing all the time that you start seeing these hidden contracts. For instance, I can remember when today they tell your children, they glamorize you being able to drive and you being able to do these things and get your license permit, and in school you can take the driver's thing and you do all that and you get your license, right? And they get their license, then they don't understand the adhesion contracts that's attached to that license and how they use that thing to track you and how they put you in bonds. I'm saying that to say, like, when you're doing it with the jagged edge, was actually selling their children they drew this here picture about America and how great it is, and the people in Europe was even selling their children into that, thinking that they was giving their children a better way of life and things like that.
You're breaking up just a bit.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
All right, this should be better, huh?
It is excellent.
Is it better?
All right. So yes, yeah. It is. You're saying the jagged edge is where it's
So when they started contracting with the people, and they come into America, but first they selling them this dream of coming to America, and then when they get there, they flip the script on them and start putting them in bondage, becoming lawless. In other words, you're thinking that even if you was coming and you had a contract for servitude, and it would be for the 7 years, and then you come over here, it's like you do 6 years, and then they do something, you get into a little argument or you get into something, and then they put up a kangaroo court or something, and then they say, okay, well, we're going to extend your contract for 10 years, or we're going to wipe the contract and keep you in bondage and things like that. So we start seeing the nature of these adhesion contracts and these people taking supposed to be authority to do certain things, calling it the law, holding these courts and calling it the law. We've seen when they started killing or doing things, and you start seeing where the actual, I want to say the corporation, because it seemed like the people that held the contracts and the people that were contracted, when it became a dispute about laws on people who held the contract, was like, it was like their word was bond against people that was contracted. So you start seeing those type of things with jagged, when you're going through chapter 5 and the jagged edge.
Well, God. And somebody else in 6. Go ahead.
And and how they take these contracts and they actually turn it into making the people actually slaves in free labor. Not
right.
keeping to the contract and making the people. They said one thing is certitude or am I using the right word? With the certitude, they give them certain many years that you say, okay, I'm going to work so many years.
Servitude and indentured slavery.
Well, and indentured slaves, indentured, but then, they was like, look, we want to keep this here thing going,
that's right.
and just make you a slave, period.
Well, they were, exactly, and see, because, again, Chapter 1 says a place for the unwanted, which really is the modern Europeans, that people erroneously call white people. That's who they are, and who they actually are, the Slavic and the slaves. And so that's what this is all about. So what you're saying in that sense is they set up the, Chapter 2 is plain. They're just doing where they set up a system where they can legalize bull crap. Not lawful, but legalized bull crap. So now we're down to someone obviously had some concern to say, look, they're not dogs, some human concern or of some kind. And that's Chapter 6. So I think that all covers the fact that they're just treated like animals, like they're not real, not human. And I think that covers us up to 6. So then you have the people trade, 7, spirited away, 8, and 9, which may be a surprise to all, foreigners in their own land.
Yo,
this is
so
all
let me step
up
in for a minute.
Yeah.
I want to say something. I believe it was in chapter 7 where they even talked about on an American continent at that time, as far as the English was concerned, it was only 25, I think it was 25 African slaves. You know, so they even gave a count. I think that was in chapter 7, where they even gave a count to, you know, according to the writer of this book, in the 1600s, that as far as African slaves on their plantations, it only was 25 or something like that, I believe also. Whereas they gave a count of the Europeans, it was over 80,000, you know, where they were saying that left England and then was enslaved. You know, they made slaves or they brought here slaves. I believe that was chapter 7. But I thought it was important to even say that to the people, you know, that according even to this guy's account, that on those plantations it only was 25. If it was that African so-called slaves. Yeah. And we know, and so we know that in that account that some of the people that came over, and I didn't put my finger on, I shouldn't say it, but I was thinking that it was even some so-called Moors in that came over as free people. I forgot what they called them. But anyway, go ahead, you can continue.
Yeah, because after all, this book is called White Cargo, Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America.
Yes.
And it just shows you how that whole thing happened. So the British were the British Moors at that time, dealing with these slaves, and then they would put some modern Europeans in a somewhat position to be the slave masters over their own people. I mean, it all sounds so familiar, doesn't it? However, the original slaves were Europeans. In fact, they were born into slavery. That's why they're so hard-hearted. I mean, so it's so important to them for the freedom that they have received. You know, it's important to them. They hold tight to that. And you know what? We need to learn the same thing. But our freedom starts first as a mental freedom, from the mental slavery and for the miseducation of information that we can get it, and that will begin ours. Otherwise than that, we will remain in that mental state. So now we go to, and that's what we're doing here, trying to help with that. The Spirited Away and foreigners in their own land, that's when they started moving them around. Spirited Away, the people traded Spirited Away, that's when they had it all set for the trade of slavery. Isn't it interesting? You thought it all started here. It did not. It started there with the modern Europeans being brought over here. So I think that covers up to 9. Now, it says foreigners in their own land. So they started capturing their own stuff. They started capturing their own people. I'm assuming that is what that is about, wasn't their land. So at this point, they hadn't necessarily brought the foreigners over yet. I mean, the slaves over yet. You know, the early parts of the book is when they were coming over themselves to set up, you know, the territories or whatever for them to do this. So chapter 9 is dealing with them, and 10, which we're going to read tonight, is the descent into the north, which would be here. I think I covered that pretty. Is that about right? On Spirited Away, foreigners in their own land?
Absolutely, yeah, that's about right. And I do want to say, so to pitch to the people, where they showed that, because what the writer was doing was showing that how they did, you know, the ethnic cleansing in Scotland, and then they replaced, and when they did that, how they replaced the areas where they went into and killed, and then start replacing the areas with the English, and how they wanted to do that here and on our continent also. So it's important to understand that they had years of practice doing that, coming in, wiping out the people, and then populating the areas that they wiped out with their own people. Foreigners on own land. All right, so that leads you into chapter 10.
So wait a minute, you're saying they did what? They say that again? How that happened? I apologize.
So they come in. How they come in to the land and kill the Aboriginal, indigenous and Aboriginal people on the land, and then how they, once they do that, how they repopulate the land with their own people.
All right, so that's it. Okay, got it. All right.
Right.
So
so that brings the confusion even. That even brings the confusion today, and I know you want to go ahead and get into it, but that even brings the confusion. That even brings the confusion today, because when we talk about Ireland and Scotland, and when we start talking about the Celtics and those things, and you find out that when you go to deep study into it, that these people were Moors, but then as a result of the ethnic, what they call it, the ethnic cleansing and stuff like that, where they come in, gentrify the area, but how they did it back then is gentrify the area. They came in and wiped out the area, and then repopulate the area with their own people, changing the names of the streets and all that type of thing. And so you see that here, and how they wanted to repopulate the areas with their own people.
All right. Yeah. All right. Yeah. That's what I think is interesting here, is that, the beginning of the whole industry or trade of slaves, to know that it started with the modern Europeans, the two Slavics. Not that they started it, but that they were it, and that's really big news to many people. Yeah. So with that, I am going to begin the reading, and now I'm going to leave you open. And I know for Corey, if he's going to press one, I know he comes in, but if he presses one, I want to read him. And since you're already on mute, you can just mute your phone while I'm reading if you want, so you'll stay up to the top, because you get a different number, and I got it now. So we just write it down so that in case something happens, we'll be able to get that. Got it. Now, so that's what I'm going to do. So if you mute your phone, I'll begin the reading. Unless there's something else you wanted to add before I start reading.
No, I'm going to mute the phone.
All right. Peace and love. So what I want to do, since we're starting on chapter 10, which is the descent in the north, I just want to cap up on the last paragraph or so of 9. And that is, after the wars and social upheavals of the middle of the century, one might have expected that transportation of Irish to serve as slaves in the English colonies might have died out. It did not, but it did tail off. In the hills and bogs and rubble continued to be rounded up occasionally and shipped off to cool their heels in the colonies. And even in the furthest outposts of the colonies, Irish continued to be indentured. In Newfoundland in the 1680s, fishermen, many of them Irish or Scottish, accumulated debts they could not pay off. They were then forced to give themselves up as indentured servants. But the flow of the Irish laborers to the colonies was not yet done, nor would it be for some time yet. In the following century, Ireland and its people became subject to new laws that made transportation a key part of its penal system. Meanwhile, dissent was brewing in another part of the nation. Chapter 10, Descent in the North. On a bleak headland in the Orkney Isles of the north of Scotland stands a roughly made stone pillar, 40 feet tall. It is a thin, tapering, four-sided pillar in the form of an obelisk, but instead of a engraved with a rounded cap, giving it the look of a giant chess piece. This is the monument to a tragedy that occurred on December 10, 1679, a few days before. Orkney lies at 59 degrees north, almost the latitude of Greenland, and in mid-December, the sun barely edges into the sky. Reaching its zenith at 10 degrees above the horizon, the sun hangs in the sky for barely 6 hours a day, providing a glimmering light from about 9:30 in the morning until just 3:30 in the afternoon. Into this eerie world sailed the Crown of London, commanded by Captain Thomas Petticoat and carrying a cargo of 257 prisoners, locked below deck. The prisoners were the remains of a defeated army of religious dissenters, Covenanters, who denied the right of either king or bishop to rule over their children. For their dissenting views, they had been prepared to die. Now, at sea off the largest earthly island of mainland, fate was ready to deal with them a further below. The ship was supposed to be on its way to the West Indies, though Petticoat's true intentions have been questioned. By sailing into such northerly latitudes in the dead of winter, he was risking his ship, the crew, and the prisoners locked below. The Crown had begun its journey at the port of Leith, outside Edinburgh, in November. A better route would have been to strike a southerly course down the east coast of Scotland and around the south coast of England. To have headed north to the Orkneys might seem to imply that the captain had some dark mission to accomplish. A gale blew up and Captain Petticoat decided to see the storm out at anchor off the headland of Scarvating at the entrance to Dearness Bay. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the ship dragged its anchor and was driven on to the rock. According to one account, the crew made it to safety by cutting a mast and using it as a bridge to dry land. One of the crew is said to have taken an axe to the deck to cut an exit for the prisoners. Some 40 to 50 made it to land. The rest perished with the ship. The shipwreck of the Crown could well have been the catalyst for Robert Louis Stevenson's famous scene in Kidnapped, the brig carrying the abducted hero to the colony's founders in heavy seas. David Balfour cleans to a yardarm and makes it ashore to freedom. In the case of the Orkney wreck, many of those who survived were subsequently rounded up and transported to become slaves in the plantation. In the troubled history of Scotland during the 17th century, these rebellious men were only a small sample of those who found themselves suffering a drastic penalty for their religious beliefs. As one 20th century historian has remarked, the troubles of these times cast many an unfortunate Scot ashore in the New World in a condition differing little, if at all, from that of the Negro slaves who toiled in the tobacco and sugar plantations. It was the era when the concept of the colonial penal colony was being turned into fact, and the policy of political banishment, long used in Ireland, was introduced to Scotland. The circumstances leading up to the death of Scarvating had their origins many years before, at the beginning of one of the most important and turbulent periods in British history. For many centuries, Scotland and England had had a border dispute. The disputed areas were known as the debatable lands. Traditionally, these areas were lawless havens for robbers, army deserters, and villains. Court of Law, the Star Chamber, sent a copy of a new code for establishing peace in the border area to Scotland's ruling body, the Privy Council, for its consideration. Of course, the king expected the Scots would bow to his will, But they did nothing of the sort. The sticking point for the Scots was Section 13. This provided for a survey of all villages and layabouts in the territory so they could be rounded up and shipped off to Virginia, which would become, in effect, a gulag for the troublesome and the unwanted. The Privy Council would have been as concerned about law and order as the Star Chamber. So this provision appeared at first sight to be one to which no exception could be taken. However, the Scottish lawmakers declined to accept the wisdom of Section 13. They had spotted a snag. Virginia and all other colonies were controlled by England, and so any deported Scots would come under the control of English masters. Those worthy of transportation might be scum, but they were Scottish scum, and as such deserved better. The traditional Scottish sentence of banishment allowed the banished one to decide upon the country of his or her exile. Transportation in this case meant serving under English rule. Unfortunately, for the delicate sensibilities of the Scots, London insisted. The Privy Council gave way while continuing to express its reservation. The following year, 1618, yet greater Scottish reservations were expressed regarding interference from London. In his attempt to bring the Presbyterian, democratically minded elders of the Church of Scotland to heel, James I had new rules drawn up, imposing rites and ceremonies that were thought to have more than a whiff of Catholicism about them. The 5 articles of purse included kneeling to take communion and confirmation of church membership conducted by bishops. To encourage recalcitrant, Church of Scotland ministers, it was suggested that those who did not wish to conduct their church services by the articles might find themselves deported. During the half century or so of struggle between state and covenanters that was to follow, this threat became real. In 1625, James I died. His son Charles inherited the crown, and with it all, the unresolved political and religious tensions that had bedeviled the state during his father's reign. Mutual distrust continued between Scotland and England. A continuing animosity between the Reformers, Calvinists, Presbyterian strain of Christianity and the more traditional ceremonial strain preferred both by James and Charles. Both father and son failed to address these factors, just as they had done little to ease the tensions between the crown and various political factors. When combined, these elements provided the impulse that led to Scotland and England being convulsed by war. One of the catalysts for what was to come took place in the ancient churchyard of Greyfriars Kirk in Edinburgh. The day for its visit to small dog, Greyfriars Bobby, famous for having lain on his owner's grave for 14 years during the 19th century, before himself being carried off by time. But Greyfriars and its churchyard are famous for more significant events than the story of the relationship between a dog and its owner. In 1638, a large group of well-established citizens met in the kirk to sign a covenant by which they affirmed their Calvinist views and their opposition to the Catholic Church. Even though Catholicism had ceased to be the official faith of England after the Reformation, many Protestants harbored worries about the new king. He was married to the devoutly Henrietta Maria, the daughter of Henry IV of France. The Scottish dissenters believed the church could be led by no man, only God himself. They were determined to resist all innovations by Charles, including the introduction of a new uniform book of liturgy. The resistance within Scotland did not rest solely on religious differences, but also on political. Charles packed the Scottish Privy Council, the ruling arm of government in Scotland, with bishops of his own choosing, so excluding many of the most powerful figures in the land. The common cause between Presbyterians and the nobility was a potent mix. After the first copy of the National Covenant signed before the altar of Greyfriars Kirk, further copies were distributed to parishes around Scotland. Soon, many thousands had put their names to a document that set itself forcefully against the will of the king, a monarch who still adhered to the doctrine of the divine right of king. 8 months after the first signing of the covenant, the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland voted to expel all bishops from the church. This was the starting point for what became known as the Bishop War. Charles I's early life indicated he was not cut out to deal with these complicated times. He was frail and had a bad stammer. When he acceded to the throne, he took steps to change his image into that of an omnipotent ruler. He commissioned portraits by the paper from Antwerp, Anthony van Dyck. In his acclaimed triple portrait, Van Dyck portrayed the king from several angles, in effect giving him 3 heads. In the event, Charles was unable to hold on to one. Although Scottish Charles hardly visited the country where the political atmosphere had darkened, miscalculations within his court, together with the increasing implacable nature of the parliamentary and religious dissent arraigned against him, were to spark a catastrophic civil war involving England, Scotland, and Ireland, culminating in 1649 with Charles' divine body being parted from his all-too-saleable head on a scaffold outside his glorious banqueting hall in Whitehall. It may be unfair to blame Charles alone, or anyone else, for that matter, for the violent melee that overtook the kingdom during the Civil War. It was as if the country had reached a point where matters of power and personal conscience had to be determined one way or the other. But even the execution of the king and the foundation of the republic did not resolve matters. The Scots were suspicious of the forces at work in Parliament in London and of the increasingly radical forms of religion in England. Sentiment swung behind the crown in the shape of the executed king's son, named Charles after his father. Although there were many who were weary of a member of the Stuart family, which had been no friend to the Presbyterians, Charles was declared King of Scotland and in June 1650 arrived hopefully from exile in France. Charles publicly and cynically agreed to a new covenant, renouncing Anglicanism in England. This gave his potential support base a pummeling. Politics in the 17th century was a difficult game, especially if one wanted to be king. Parliament suspected that Charles would now soon raise an army and advance on England. On a September day in 1650, Cromwell led an army of 16,000 men over the Scottish border. Cromwell's genius resided in being well prepared. But the self-taught general was not only sensible in preparation, he was also flexible in battle. Perhaps his greatest quality as a commander was that he could inspire his men. At Dunbar, he faced a much stronger Scottish force of 23,000. According to reports, before going into the battle, Cromwell appealed to the enemy commander to consider his position. After all, Cromwell did not see that he had a quarrel so much with the Presbyterian troops as with Charles himself. I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, think it possible you may be mistaken, he said. The Scots took no heed. Maybe one group of zealots knew better than to trust another. 3,000 Scottish soldiers died in the battle, and many broke ranks and fled. Cromwell's smaller army won the day. Cromwell took 9,000 to 10,000 prisoners. About half of them were quickly freed as being too badly injured to remain a threat. Plans were drawn up to disperse the remaining prisoners among the colonies in Ireland, Virginia, and Barbados. How many were in fact sent is unknown. Calamities were to overwhelm both plans and the prisoners. The remaining 5,000 prisoners were forced marched to Durham. Along the way, 2,000 or more died of illness, exhaustion, and starvation. Others simply drifted away. On 11 September, the survivors were herded into various makeshift prisons in Durham, including the castle and the Norman Cathedral, one of the most beautiful hymns to the miraculous in Northern Europe. For many, the cathedral became their place of death. Army commanders siphoned off the money allocated to feed them. Malnutrition led to disease, and the cold sapped the prisoners' strength. The desperate soldiers ripped up pews and wooden paneling to burn in dwindling efforts to keep warm. Starvation was their chief enemy. By the end of October, 1,600 had died. Of the remaining 1,400 men, many were deported to the West Indies as slave laborers. Hold on. They do have a couple maps in here on page 161. That's the page that we're on with the map. A 1719 map of the British colonies of Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. This is from the National Maritime Museum, so I'm sure you could get it there. And then the James River running into Chesapeake Bay at its southern end is the first successful, above the word, is ferry company. And this is also from the National Maritime Museum. As well, they have a few photos, all coming from, this is basically from, but I guess it's the National Museum. It says Sir Humphrey Gilbert, the bloodthirsty pioneer who first claimed Virginia for England and became a national hero after dying a romantic death. This is from the National Portrait Gallery in London, however. And then we have Sir John Popham, the highwayman, who became Lord Chief Justice and tried to colonize New England with convicts. National Portrait Gallery also in London. And then a replica of the brigantine Godspeed, one of the fleet of 3 ships that brought the settlers to the first English colony in America at Jamestown in 1607. One of the passengers described his companions as unruly, lascivious sons, and bad servants. And this is from NASA. I don't think that's national. That's the National Association of College Students, because it's a boat. One real picture, early settlers sought religious freedom in the colonies, like these Catholics depicted attending the first Mass in Maryland in 1634. But for the majority of settlers, freedom was an illusion. They would spend years in bondage. There are a few more pictures, and we'll just go through them. England's first merchant prince, Sir Thomas Smith, Smith, actually, spelled with a Y, who effectively controlled Virginia from England and set white slavery in motion. Wow. National Portrait Gallery in London. And the next picture is, no wonder the Earl of Carlisle raises an eyebrow. You'll see that picture of the Earl of Carlisle, and he had his left eyebrow raised. He was given Barbados by Charles I, even though others had paid to develop it. Photographic Survey, Portland Institute of Art. Now, remember, they were not really given the land. They were given use of the land with their patents and charters. So, and we have now the hanging judge called George Jeffreys, of whom it was said would sooner hang a man became an unexpected hero when he broke up a transportation racket in Bristol. It's also from the National Portrait Gallery in London. And, okay, we have the Quaker William Penn receiving the warrant from Charles II for Pennsylvania, the land of freedom, in which white slavery was to become widespread. Now, it's interesting, they're saying the warrant, they talk about, that's William Penn, right? As I said, getting I can't think of it now. But, yeah, they called it a warrant then. But it's use, the patent, use, William Penn patent, it's use of the land, not the land. And then we have the angelic-looking Mary of Modena, second wife of James II, made money selling rebel prisoners into bondage in the American colonies. Also from the National Portrait Gallery in London, and Queen Anne was used in her portrait was used in propaganda to entice tens of thousands of Germans to America. Well, you probably should have left out this stuff for the photo. So her portrait was used in propaganda to entice tens of thousands of Germans to America, where some had to sell their children. Whoa. National Portrait Gallery in London. And then we have the boat called the Centaur, one of the disease-ridden hulks on the Thames used to house hundreds of prisoners when America closed its doors to British convicts. That is from the Greenwich Heritage Center. And we have a picture of the children. And these children are convicts, including two children, oldest children, in chains by the neck. Sounds familiar. En route to a prison park on the Thames. And that's from the Greenwich Heritage Center as well. And then we have another picture. When I say picture, these are illustrations because, of course, they were not photos, but they're illustrations. George Washington, the upholder of liberty, but not for slaves, either black or white. Benjamin Franklin told the British Parliament that for every convict they sent over, a rattlesnake should be sent back, though the rattlesnake gives warning before he attempts his mission, which the convict does not. So that was pictures that were, I'm going to finish reading the text, and we were left at, by the end of October, 1,600 had died. Of the remaining 1,400, many were deported to the West Indies as slave labor. How many is not known, but it is safe to assume that not nearly as many were deported as originally planned for. This was not the only example of Parliament using transportation as a solution to political defense. The decisive Battle of Worcester was fought in 1651 between a combined Scotch royalist army under the direct command of Charles II and the parliamentarian army under the commander of Oliver Cromwell. It was to be the final battle for both commanders and a crowning mercy, according to the victorious Cromwell. 8,000 Scotch soldiers were taken prisoner, while Charles went into hiding, pending his escape to France. The Parliamentarian Council of State charged the Committee for Prisoners to grant a license for the transportation of the Scots to the West Indies. In 1656, Scottish prisoners who had fought at Worcester had been transported, complaining that their sentences of servitude were being illegally. A committee of inquiry back in London investigated the matter and upheld their sentences. For years later, the Council of State was issuing directives for Scots, Irish, English, and other seamen imprisoned in Plymouth Castle to be sent to Barbados, and a further 1,200 men imprisoned in Port Patrick in Scotland and Knockfergus in Ireland were to be sent to Jamaica. Not all fared badly. Many years later, one of the Scots who settled in New Jersey from around 1680 onwards, wrote home that he had had a drink with one of the old Buxton planters, a Scot who was sent away by Cromwell to New England as a slave from Dunbar, living now in Woodbridge like a countryman and his native soil very well, though he never intends to see it if he comes back. Following Cromwell's death in 1658 and the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, the threat of transportation might have lifted over Scottish dissenters. It was not to be. Charles II, who had only a few years earlier signed a covenant supporting Presbyterianism, quickly moved to reestablish episcopacy, rule of the church. That's episcopal, they call it. Rule of the church by hierarchy of bishops. For 20 years, the church in Scotland had been run along Presbyterian lines. Now it seems that the Scottish wish to worship in their own manner was again to be thwarted. From the year of the restoration of the monarchy, concerted efforts were made to enforce Anglican disciplines upon the Church of Scotland. Serious disruption followed. In 1670, a law was passed making it mandatory that anyone with knowledge of conventicles or religious gatherings should divulge such information to the authorities. This was widely disobeyed. Soon prisoners and poll booths were overflowing with prisoners. Prisons and poll booths were overflowing with prisoners. Threats of deportation were widely issued, though just how many people were actually turned. One case highlights differences between the Anglican authorities and Presbyterian population. The friends of 60 or more men about to be transported interceded upon their behalf to two of the archbishops. This being a good, merciful men, they reaffirmed the sentence. A London merchant, Ralph Williamson, petitioned for the right to sell the sentenced men off for the best price. His request was granted, and the Virginia governor was instructed to waive his colony's prohibition on criminals so that the Covenanters might be imported. Williamson carried his human cargo to London for sale, only to discover that no ship captain on the North Atlantic run would take the Covenanters, for feeling ran high in favor of the dissenters. Money was raised at church services, and they were finally returned to Scotland. Williamson also returned, the poorer and wiser for his team. Williamson's experiences might help to explain the mystery with which we began this chapter. Captain Tedesco's decision to take the crown on a perilous voyage to the Orkneys rather than plot a southerly course to London. For what if Tedesco had not intended to take his cargo all the way to the Indies, but rather to sell it to the American agents in England? Perhaps he had heard about the hostile reception that Williamson had received the previous year, human cargo around the north of Scotland and down the west coast to sell in Liverpool or Bristol. Perhaps he felt the perils of the sea were preferable to the perfidy of London trade. As the royal will began to be felt, dissent quickly spread, particularly in southwest Scotland, where congregations gathered to hear sermons given by banned preachers. Some of these religious protesters were of an extreme form of Covenanter, and the army was deployed to track down and break up these illegal assemblies. In Lanarkshire, Ayrshire, and Galloway, the king's policy led to an atmosphere of suspicion to informers and the threat of imprisonment or deportation. Some skirmishes exploded into armed rebellion. In 1679, a troop of dragoons was dispatched to disperse a large conventicle reported to be mustering outside Kilmarnock in Ayrshire. When the dragoons reached the spot that intelligence had indicated, a foggy Moor called Drum Clock, they were met by a large religious congregation protected by 250 armed men. The Covenanters were ready for trouble. Hold on, I just want to hide that. The Covenanters were ready for trouble, armed with an array of weapons ranging from muskets to pitchforks. They managed to see off the dragoons, who found themselves mired in the foggy ground. The victory is not much more than a brief skirmish with UCAS, but it acted as the catalyst by which many more took to arms. Within a week, several thousand had gathered at Bothwell Bridge by the Clyde in Lanarkshire. Instead of forging themselves into an army, however, the rebels turned themselves into a religious debating society. As the government's forces gathered, the rebels became increasingly fragmented, bickering over the role of more moderate Presbyterians in their midst, all in the drive to create a spiritually pure God's army. The numbers of combined rebel forces reached at one point perhaps 7,000 or more. But by the time the battle commenced, they were down to 4,000, with many having simply drifted away. In the event, the divine spark was not with the dissenters during the battle. The government forces commanded by the Duke of Monmouth, the illegitimate son of Charles II, now outnumbered them. Numbers hardly mattered, though, for the rebel force was badly commanded and lacked discipline on the field of battle as much as it had beforehand. With the rebel infantry quickly abandoned by its cavalry, the fight was soon over. 400 foot fleeing with their commanders. Monmouth issued orders to prevent more bloodshed, and 1,200 rebels were taken prisoners. The fate of the prisoners was not dissimilar to that of those imprisoned in Durham Cathedral. They were marched east to Edinburgh, where, as the city's prisons could not take so many, they were imprisoned in a makeshift gaol at the southern end of Greyfriars Kirkyard. Several Covenanters were already wanted for crimes against the state, were hanged in the city's grass market. For the remainder, imprisonment soon became a trial of endurance, amounted to little more than a walled pen open to the sky, so that the inmates were at the mercy of the elements. Some townsfolk took pity on them and threw scraps of food over the prison walls. But as summer turned into autumn and on to winter, the future looked bleak for the prisoners. Several hundred of the Covenanters agreed to sign a bond to relinquish their dissenting ways and were set free. Of the remainder, some died. The survivors who still refused to denounce the covenant were sentenced to transportation and slavery in the colonies. These were the men who were shipwrecked in Orkney. According to a cloud of witnesses, a compilation of names and stories of numbers of those who were punished for their part in the Covenanting rebellion in 1712. From 1678 onwards, there were banished to be sold for slaves for the same cause for which others suffered death at home, of men and women about 1,700. Of these, many survived their servitude and went on to settle in America. Some of those transported even made it home to Scotland. Among them was the Covenanter farmer John Matheson, transported for converse with rebels. Matheson was one of the 30 who were transported to Carolina. He was deported in a ship owned or chartered by a notorious Glasgow merchant, Walter Gibson, in the summer of 1684. Sometime before he died, around 1709, Matheson wrote his story, which was published a century later than a collection of dying testimonies. I became acquainted with some of these who were declared rebels, and then I was to understand matters better and be as they were in judgment and practice. Mantis's journey to Carolina took, by his account, 19 weeks. If this was so, then everyone on board must have suffered terribly, since voyages were expected to last 8 or 10 weeks. Severe shortages of food and water must have caused real hardship. Sickness would have become a major problem, and many on board could have died. When the voyage ended, Mantis's afflictions were not at an end, as, together with his fellow deportees, he rebelled against being sold as an indentured servant. Their cruelty to us was because we would not consent to our own selling or slavery, for then we were miserably beaten, and I especially received 9 great blows upon my back by one of his sea fellows, so that for some days I could not lift my head higher nor my breath, which strokes or blows I looked upon to be the beginning of all my body pain and diseases that have been upon me since that time until now. By some chance, he does not tell us how, maybe a sudden and some of his colleagues escaped from the plantations in Carolina and sailed to Virginia, encountering a storm en route. From there, he and his companions traveled on. How they survived, we are not told, but the options would not have gone beyond living from hand to mouth and taking laboring jobs when and where possible. After some period of time, Mantis was forced to become indentured to keep body and soul together. What he writes. Whereafter soon I fell sick, and during which sickness I was kindly entertained and taken care of by the man and his wife in whose house I lay, and with whom I had balanced myself. For albeit we had escaped from them that had brought us over, and could not work to them, yet we behooved to work for something to bring us back again. From thence I came to New York on my journey homeward, where I agreed with the shipmaster to bring me to London. So when he finally returned to Scotland, Mantis had an unusual and poignant homecoming. Entered the house, his wife was busy preparing dinner for the reapers. She did not recognize him, but took him for a traveler who had come in to rest himself. She pressed him to take some refreshment, which he did, when she went out to the field with a portion for the reapers. As she went out, he rose and followed her at a respectful distance. She turned around and fancying he had not been satisfied with her hospitality, said to the bystanders, "The man wants a second dinner." The words through the eyes of the reaper formed him, when one of his sons whispered to his mother, "If my father be alive, it is him." He turned round, looked into the stranger's face for a moment, and then ran to embrace, crying out, "My husband!" As elsewhere, transportation of undesirables of any and every sort became good business in Scotland. The impetus for the founding of Scottish settlements in America came from a proposal from the provost of Linlithgow to the Scottish Privy Council in 1681, urging that the advantage of such colonies was that they would void the country of very many both idle and dissenting persons. The good provost was asking for a group of merchants who stood to make a profit on the transportation of human cargo. A few months later, one of those merchants, Walter Gibson, the same man who had expedited the transportation of William Mantis, wrote to the Privy Council that he was willing to carry to the colonies thieves or robbers sentenced by the Lords of Judiciary or other judges to be banished thither, and all foreigners, which are vagabonds, lusty beggars or gypsies. Gibson got his line. Magistrates were ordered to give into his tender care those who had been convicted of minor crimes and those thus would normally clutter up the prison and be a burden on the parish. So he was strong and idle beggars, gypsies, or other vagabond persons, probably here meaning strong-armed captives, and robbery, and have no visible means to support themselves, to the effect that they be transported to the petitioner's ship, to the plantation, and the country freed of them. As in Ireland and England, Scotland was fortunate to find that its social and colonial policy could fit so comfortably with the needs of its merchants and even of those lawyers and worthies holding senior official position. And that is chapter 10. And let me see what time it is. We could do one more chapter. Yes, this is a short chapter at least. I know we can. Yeah. And then maybe we'll stop and discuss some things. I know someone looking at where I wrote where they mentioned about the Moor on page 163. It looks like to me they just came and stopped them from accosting people. So we will go to chapter 11, the planter from Angola. All through these middle years of the 17th century, a vast trade in black slaves was developing, but it largely passed by the English colonies on the mainland. The 20 and odd Negroes sold in Point Comfort in 1619 were no more or less enslaved than the free willers or convicts they would have encountered on the shore. It took decades more for the plantation owners of the Chesapeake to begin to buy people in any numbers from the black slave market, and much longer for the legal edifice of black bondage to evolve. The story of an African who is believed to have been among those arriving in 1619 shows that the onset of racial slavery in America had the most unlikely twist and turn. Anthony Johnson, as the African came to be known, not only secured his freedom, but also became a successful planter himself and went on to buy servants of his own, white as well as black. 30 years after Johnson first touched American soil, he got into a dispute with a servant, a fellow African who was demanding his freedom. Johnson resolved it by persuading a court to enslave the man for life. This was one of the first cases of lifetime slavery being imposed in North America. A black man playing one of the villains in the ghastly tragedy that was beginning to unfold. Note on that. The Africans from the White Lion are thought to have been bought originally by the two wealthiest planters in Virginia. One was Sir George Yeardley, governor of the colony, a venal man who seems to have acquired more white servants than anyone else in those early days of the colony. The other was Abraham Piercy, the Virginia Company's trading agent. It is widely claimed that this transaction marked the beginning of slavery, that almost from the start, the men and women from the White Lion were a separated class, lower in status than all those around. The picture is of Johnson and the other Africans suffering great debility, subject to more degradation than the white servants. One color changed and kicked, the other merely changed. English racism was supposedly at work, dividing black and white from the moment the Angolians trooped ashore. In reality, however, the Africans appear to have been treated as indentured servants, no different from the English servants. Racism may well have existed, but in the rush to profit, the color of a field laborer was a secondary consideration. Having enough hands to hold the next 10,000 tobacco hills was paramount. Black mixed with white in the tobacco labor gang and would continue to do so into the next century in some places. As the African American writer, sorry. As the African American writer Lerone Bennett Jr. puts it, not only in Virginia, but also in New England and New York, the first blacks were integrated into a forced labor system that had little or nothing to do with. That came later. But in the interim, a fateful 40-year period of primary importance in the history of America, black men and women worked side by side with the first generation of whites, cultivating tobacco, clearing land, and building roads and houses. Between the servants themselves, there appears to have been little, if any, racism. According to the African-American historian Audrey Smedley, early references to blacks reveal little clear evidence of general or widespread social antipathy on account of their color. Professor Smedley writes, records show a fairly high incidence of cooperation among black and white servants and unified resistance to harsh masters. The early historian of servitude, Edmund and Morgan, saw each other as sharing the same predicament. Perhaps the story would have been different had the sale of the White Lion's cargo triggered an overpowering influx of Africans. It had no such impact. No one's eyes in London or in Jamestown seem to have been open at this point to the possibility of using African labor in any major way, and for some time only limited numbers of Africans were shipped in. Over the next 10 years, several English privateers reportedly did arrive in Chesapeake with Africans for sale, and men and women were brought in from Dutch territory and from the West Indies. But Virginia continued to rely on the white servant trade. By the mid-17th century, Africans numbered only 300 out of a total settler population of 11,000. Small numbers were there emerged some stories of individual success. After their indentured period expired, a handful of Africans went on to secure land of their own and to prosper. They apparently had no difficulty in acquiring properties of their own and engaged in business and commercial activity on the basis of equality with whites, writes Professor Smedley. Some black men of substance even acquired slaves of their own. Anthony Johnson became one such man of substance. His first Jamestown master appears to have sold him to another very wealthy man, Edward Bennett, a merchant ship owner. In 1622, Bennett sent Johnson and 50 or more servants to clear the woods for a plantation on the James River at a point now known as Fort Boyton. The merchant called the plantation Bennett's Ruffle. His party arrived at the site in February 1622. The following month, before a palisade could be built, the Powhatan Confederacy launched its Good Friday Massacre. Another Anthony Johnson, was one of only 12 survivors of the attack at Bennett's Ruffle. Johnson spent up to another dozen years as a servant before being freed and allotted a tract of land, a farm on the Punkateep River. Over the next 3 decades, he built a sizable land holding and imported more than a dozen servants, some English, some African. The head rights claimed on these people helped Johnson accumulate 1,000. The only marked difference between Johnson and the white planters around him was the name that he gave his Northampton County plantation. He called it Angola. The American dream was also coming true for several other Africans imported as indentured servants. But after 1640, the prospects for Africans overall were worsening right across the eastern seaboard of America. English colonies on the mainland had begun edging in different ways towards racial slavery and at a different pace, with the men in power quite possibly having little idea of where they were headed. Massachusetts, for instance, goes down in history as the first colony to legalize slavery, but no race was targeted when it did so. Indeed, at first glance, the Massachusetts Declaration on Slavery reads more as a trumpet blast for freedom than the reverse. It announces, there shall never be any bond slavery, villanage, or captivity amongst us, and then lists the exception. Everyone from prisoners of war to such strangers as willingly sell themselves or are sold to us, and anyone else judged thereby by the authority. The worsening condition of the Africans manifested itself first in the lifetime enslavement of isolated individuals. Who this first happened to isn't known, but the earliest recorded cases are of men who were being punished for running away, and what is more, for running away together with white servants. The whites they ran with received especially vicious punishment too, though short of enslavement for life. This would be reserved for blacks. The runaway is one of the constants throughout the history of American servitude. From the dreaded days of Sir Thomas Dale, men and women were slipping away into the forest or taken to the water in the hope of finding refuge with Native Americans or losing themselves in another colony. They would continue to do so long after the English period and up to the American Civil War. To run was the only resort of the desperate servant slave. Judging from the increasingly harsh deterrence adopted, more and more were running as the 17th century advanced. As with virtually every servant crime, the first stage of punishment was a whipping. In Virginia, constables apprehending runaways were instructed to administer an immediate whipping, and every constable who escorted them on the journey back to the plantation was told to follow suit. Every constable into whose hands the captive shall be committed shall whip him severely. Maryland flirted briefly with making desertion a capital offense, but instead adopted the Virginia way, slapping an extra stretch of time on the servant's indentured period. At first, the formula was 2 days extra servitude for every day on the run. But in Virginia, that escalated to 5 days for every day absent, and in Maryland, to 10 days. Other colonies followed the Chesapeake League, but was generally content with the 2-for-1 ratio. But all added something else to the extra tide a runaway faced: compensation for the cost of hunting him or her down. Some planners expense claims were staggered, including such items as the planter hiring his own horse to himself. At the end of it, someone who had tasted perhaps a few months of freedom faced years of extra slavery. This harshness reflected the planter's determination to stab on all kinds of times when the whip of insurrection was beginning to spread. Discontent could be centered across the Chesapeake in a series of many rebellions and plots and acts of violence on the plantation in which black and white servants acted together. In this atmosphere, escape attempts were viewed as a part of the same movement. In 1640, the Virginia planter, Hugh Gwynn, raised a hue and cry over 3 servants who had escaped into Maryland. One was a Scot, one a Dutchman, and one, John Punt, was an African. On hearing the news that they had been caught and detained in Maryland, their master Gwynn decided to have the 3 sold where they had been picked up. That would save him the extra expense of bringing them back in chains and produce enough cash to purchase more tractable servants. However, the idea of runaway servants possibly going unpunished mortified the Virginia court. It ruled against such a pernicious precedent, and in June 1640, asked the governor of Maryland to have the 3 returned to Virginia for such exemplary and consigned punishment as the nature of their offense shall justly deserve. The next month, the escapees were arraigned in a Virginian court. All were given 30 strokes of the whip. In addition, the two whites were ordered to serve their full terms with Gwen, plus an extra year on top. Moreover, after that was served, they were to be bound for a further 3 years as servants of the colony. For John Punch, the African, the news was even worse. After his whipping, he was to serve his said master or his assigned for the time of his natural life here or elsewhere. John Punch is thus the first recorded case of the lifetime enslavement of an African American. 2 weeks later, another mixed-race group of servant escapees appeared in the same court. They consisted of an African, 4 Englishmen, and 2 men described as Dutch. Though they bore English names, they had taken part in a well-organized attempt to reach Dutch territory by river in guns and took off on a Saturday night. When they reached the Elizabeth River, their ship was spotted and they were caught. The alleged ringleader, one of the Dutchmen named as Christopher Miller, was punished with venomous severity. He was to be given 30 strokes of the whip, have the letter R branded on the cheek, and spend at least 1 year wearing a leg iron. Longer if said master shall be called. When he had served out the full contracted period with his master, Miller was to become the property of the colony as its servant for a further 7 years. The second Dutchman was to serve those 7 extra years too. The Englishmen were punished slightly less severely after whipping and branding and serving out their contracted time. One was to serve the colony for 3 years and 2 others for 2.5 years. The other Englishman among them was merely put on probation. Perhaps he gave his companions away. In other words, perhaps he was the snitch, as was to say. As for the African who was named as Emmanuel, he was to be whipped, branded, and shackled. There is no mention in the records of him serving extra time, so it can be assumed that he, like John Punch a few months earlier, was enslaved for life. Over the next decade, perpetual slavery of Africans evidently became common enough for the extraordinary story of John Caesar to be played out. This was something of a test case in which a black servant claimed his indentured period had expired years before, and his master counterclaimed that he was his servant for life. The twist in the story is that the master seeking this lifetime sentence was Anthony Johnson. The case, hold on everyone, one second. Okay. The case was fought out in the early 1650s. Caesar had fled Anthony Johnson's Angola plantation and sought refuge with a neighboring planter. The runaway insisted that he had been held for 7 years beyond his indentured term. The neighbor, Robert Parker, believed Caesar and kept him on his own plantation. Johnson was determined to get his property back and went to court. The ensuing legal battle saw Robert Parker representing the runaway Caesar in court. The case dragged on for 2 years, presenting the bewildering sight of a white planter fighting a black planter to save a black servant from perpetual slavery. At one juncture, Johnson was persuaded by his sons to free Caesar, but then reneged on the settlement. In the end, Johnson triumphed. The Northampton County Court ruled that Caesar had indeed been a slave all along and instructed that he immediately to Johnson, who was to be compensated for the 2 years Caesar had been free. Robert Parker was ordered to pay him damages for sheltering the runaway. 20 years later, Caesar was still owned by Mary Johnson, Anthony Johnson's widow. By then, lifetime black slaves were becoming the norm, and all the colonies have passed laws either recognizing slavery in principle or specifically legalizing it. Massachusetts led the way in 1641, followed by Connecticut in 1650, Virginia in 1661, Maryland in 1663, and New York and New Jersey in 1664. Others followed later. These laws left black freedmen like the Johnsons still free, but they were no longer treated like other planters. They could still buy black servants, but they were barred from buying white servants. In 1671, another measure made all non-Christian servants newly shipped into Virginia slaves for life. Non-Christians meant Africans. Non-Christians meant Africans. 2 years later, the Colonial Assembly passed another act validating the enslavement of the Indian captives. Legally, servitude and slavery had been divided, and a further move underlined this. Virginia enacted legislation making black slavery hereditary. The relevant act read as follows. Whereas some doubts have arisen whether children got by any Englishman upon a Negro woman shall be slave or free. Be it therefore enacted and declared by this present Grand Assembly that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free, only according to the condition of the mother. I must take a break here. Make a note here. When we went to the newly established African American Museum, this statement right there that I just read on the wall, and if you look at the coverage of that that's on Mantis 29, you will see me, I believe me, reading that. And this also is in conjunction with, happens to be with natural law, that the condition of the child is based on the mother. So let me read it again so you can be clear. Whereas some doubts have arisen whether children got by the English men upon a Negro woman shall be slave or free. Be it therefore enacted and declared by this present Grand Assembly that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free, only according to the condition of the mother. End of that. That utterly reversed the basic principle in English common law that a child's status, although there was no abrupt surge of Africans, the racial balance in the tobacco field was changed. In the first quarter of the 17th century, white outnumbered blacks in the Chesapeake by more than 20 to 1. By the last quarter of the century, the ratio had narrowed to 3 to 1. With 2,000 black slaves in Virginia and 6,000 white servants, by the end of the century, the gap was closing fast. Estimates put the numbers landing in neighboring Maryland in 1698 at between 600 and 700 whites and about 450 Africans. The shift from the time-limited servitude of Englishmen to the lifetime slavery of Africans was prompted by economics as much as racism. The Caribbean plantations were demonstrating the much larger profits openly enslaved workforce could produce, and the Chesapeake planters took note. More and more, black slavery appeared the better long-term investment. This was especially so when mortality rates began to fall. In the decades when half the workforce died inside 5 years, it wasn't good business to purchase men for a life term at twice the price of a time-limited white slave. When mortality rates improved, that calculation changed and lifetime slaves became more worth buying. One might have expected this to be the beginning of the end for the white slave business, but there was still much money to be made trade in white labor. Whoa. That's the end of chapter 11. Let's see what time is it. I think that we might want to have some discussion on this. Let me just check chapter 12. Yeah, textbook's fairly long, so I don't know. My feeling is to to maybe end here so we can have some discussion of what was just read. So what I'm going to do is, hold on a minute. Yeah, that's like that. I believe I'm making a decision here. Danny might have read one more chapter because I just tried to get in 3. So if you would unmute yourself, and if anyone who wants to join in this conversation, I know, but Carrie, if you would press 1 so I can join you in, or if anyone is interested in joining in on conversations that may come now regarding the 2 chapters that we have read, please press 1. I'm not sure if I did it. Here we have. You're there? Are you? Yes, you're right. Yeah, I never took you off of mute, but I also have Bakari. Is that you?
Yes, Mother.
How are you?
Greetings. Oh, good.
Whoa. Good. let me just say this. We really need the truth. You know what? You know what this reminds me of? When the prophet Noah Turali, in his marvelous work that he left us, he said, listen, all nations have suffered slavery. Go check it out. I am looking at, slavery is slavery. Because we can be all jubileed or all happy or all whatever about the fact that, oh my goodness, it was Europeans who were, modern Europeans, they were slaves first. But, getting beyond that, this is just inhumane to have slavery regardless. But I think it will give us a better understanding overall of the condition that we think we're in or are in by knowing the truth about, the history, heritage, and the truth about slavery. I don't know. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Oh, by the way, can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Yes. Wow. Well, that was powerful. I got to tell you that chapter 11 really, at the end of the chapter, when I learned of these Africans being enslaved and then enslaving others, it added to this, to the horror, if you will, of this entire story or this book, because it's not about. I mean, like, they are starting to make distinctions, at the end of chapter 11 about, who to enslave and the benefits of it, and so it's a total financial way to make profit, and it's like monstrous, like to me, it's how can I don't even know how to characterize it, other than to say that it's like you have these individuals who are walking upright as men, but who have the character of a predator, an animal that walks on 4 legs. And so there is no excuse for it. I mean, absolutely no excuse for it. In my mind, regardless of nationality, regardless of circumstances, for war, people have discussed, the benefits of enslaving prisoners of war and treating them in a certain fashion, but I don't see any benefit in doing that. Like, I don't see any long-term benefit in doing that. And one can argue, whether it's necessary. Many generals from various nations over, throughout history have, treated their, prisoners with dignity, and others have not. And so, in short, I can just simply say that I can't see, and, certainly I can't speak for anyone else, but I can't see any, in my mind, there's absolutely no reason that I can fathom that warrants the enslavement of another man, woman, child, or an animal. It's because that's what's going on today. Aside from enslaving, I'm sorry.
I said enslaving everything.
Yeah, enslaving everything, enslaving animals, enslaving, birds that fly in the air, and, things that crawl on the ground, things that swim.
Well, you know what? Let me just interject here. Because what is being uncovered here is that, it's not like this is prisoners of war. This is not like that. This is like, let's create slavery on everything. That's what it is.
Right.
Yeah. So, right. And I would like to. So you can finish what you were saying. I just wanted to make that clear. That does not get this confused with prisoners of war as you may think of it. Although this right here is a civil war, both from a spiritual place to the physical place. Anytime that you want to take someone's freedom, I mean that's civil. Inhumane. So this is about slavery, period. And I understand. I understand better why. When even over here, you get these white Europeans who say, "Look, this is all we know is slavery." Matter of fact, we were born as slaves. That's a whole nother chapter we got to go through. Not in this book, but chapter period of history is how they even got here. But we were born as slaves, so all we know is slavery. And it keeps repeating the history. Every time they're in some position and they get helped out of it, then they turn their eyes to see, well, how can we enslave somebody? That's what they do because that's what and who they are. That's what they do because that's what they know. And I would add that, once they brought all this chaos and confusion over here, that's why later, because we're coming up to the 1600s, 1700s, etc., and into what we call modern day slavery that we think was just us. That's why the law of the land, the Constitution, that was to end the slavery, because this terrible mindset, existed, and unfortunately it is still there because that's what they know. Not all of them, but yeah. So,
Islam.
God.
Yeah. I just wanted to say one last quick thing, and if you would be so kind, Brother Asim, Anna's Brother Asim, I just wanted to make this a quick statement. And, I had a thought while I was reading earlier today, and I was thinking about how borders are created. And I wanted to juxtapose that against enslavement, because it seems to me that there are many nations who are living right next to each other, like, as an example, North and South Korea, right? Here you have these people who look exactly the same, right? And then other, not just them. I'm not trying to, say that they're the only ones, but this type of activity takes place all over the planet. How it started, I don't know, but it seems to me that perhaps the quest for land and survival or domination creates these borders at any, regardless of what the consequences are. And to me, that's not civilized. To me, again, that seems to be indicative of a two-legged being that's supposed to be of a higher consciousness, actually having the consciousness or the character or the mentality of a lower animal. Because lower animals, like take, for instance, the chimpanzee or other, big cats, territory is extremely important. Extremely important. And when you encroach upon another's territory, you got to fight. Somebody ain't going to make it, you see. And I yield the floor.
Islam, that's right. That's right. Islam. It's so many perspectives. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay. Oh, wow. It's so many perspectives to look at Chapter 10 and Chapter 11 to bring you up to modern times. One, when I was thinking about Johnson, I was thinking about be careful, you Moors, with some of you wearing fezzes and turbans will sell you back into slavery, put you back into slavery. When I was thinking about Johnson fighting so hard to keep his brother enslaved, and putting him back into slavery, that's that perspective. But as you read, it was so much to write down, especially about when you was reading the part about the dude named Monmouth. I was thinking about Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, because he was warned, and so it made me think about the Fort Monmouth, New Jersey there. And then when the religious sect they were locked up, they were jailed, and what brought to mind was when they signed a bond to relinquish their dissembling ways and were set free. All right, we have to read into that because they created a bond and told them to sign a bond, and we know what those bonds are. It was dealt with money. And then also in here it talked about the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. And when we talking about these states, always remember plantation, colony, state, they all are the same thing. All right? They just evolved with the language, and created a way to, in some people's mind, to subvert the thought in some people's mind to think government. But these are still plantations, these states. And when they talked about Pennsylvania and say it again.
I discovered that religion is government. That's why the prophet said, to declare your nationality and your religion. Religion is government.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
And so.
But go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. My thought was this General Assembly thing, because we see that especially a lot of active Moors in these certain, it's all the states, but in certain states where the General Assembly is actually, that corporation is actually governing. So, for instance, in Pennsylvania, the General Assembly where they create these statutes and these codes. They was doing it then, and they doing it now. All right, and we see it, real clearly where they speak about it here. All right, and another point that I came across and wanted to bring to the attention that you was a lot of the times you hear Moors talking about Harriet Tubman, and you hear about runaways and the Underground Railroad, and you get a glimpse of what happened here, where you hear that you had Moors on one part of the land, the children taken away, put on ships, and the ships was merely floated up the river or sailed up the river to another part of the land, and they were docked and unloaded the cargo. All right, now they calling this here the slave trade from the African continent to the Americas, but here he's clearly showing where he talked about the escape from the plantations in Carolina and sailed to Virginia, where these people escaped from Carolina. Now, you know where Carolina at, and you know where Virginia is at. But what they did to escape, they got on the ship in the Carolinas, either South or North Carolina, and just sailed up the river to Virginia, and then from Virginia, they went to New York on a ship, and then to London. But he's clearly demonstrating here how they moved the Moors around. What they call in here the Native Americans around, when they captured them on the land and then shipped them to different parts of the land, even up into Massachusetts in these different areas where they give you in Barbados. And I have an interesting story about Barbados, because one of my family members amalgamated and had children, and we were doing ancestry. They amalgamated with a European female, and they had children, and we were all doing family legacy type of a thing, and she discovered that her ancestors was from Barbados. And at the time when this happened, I wasn't abreast and wasn't learned about, the European slave trade and how they took them to the Irish, and she is Irish, and how they took them to the islands there. And I was like, wow, she must be mixed with some Moors. And now this comes to light. And you see where these was Europeans who were enslaved in Barbados, and the Caribbeans, period. Further than that, but it just brings that to light when they're doing their family tree. And when we was looking at, you talk about it all the time, these ancestries.coms, and these people say, I'm part this, I'm 20% this, I'm 20% that, and really, they really not distinguishing the land there. But all those things brought to mind in this here. Also, this Privy Council and the Provost, Provost, as far as these authorities here who in here that they're talking about here. Excuse me a minute.
Let me say this. I got a message from Sister Annie E. Peace and love to Sister Annie E. Well, obviously, is listening. And she sent a message when we were talking about why they behave this way. She has a great answer to this. She said they behave this way because they do not want to return to the status that they once had So they revert to their predator instinct with the objective that if they enslave everyone and everything and constantly look out for this, they will never return to that status of enslaved, worthless animal of no value and expendable. It is a result of their extreme fear to return to that status. That makes sense to me. That's why it's so innate with them. And, you know, it makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So, the truth must be told about their history. That's why, you know, a lot of people misunderstand when you get a good European history. You know, they say, go get yourself, as the prophet said, he said, go get yourself a good European education, because in seeking and studying, you would find what we're finding. You know, you would find the truths about things. So, and you also know that we actually originally taught them. So, this is, wow, I'm telling you, you got to have a stable mind in these days with a better foundation or a good foundation in order to even receive this information that we're getting now, because we don't have a place to put it. You know, you're like, oh, I thought we were, you know, slaves from my birth. No, they were. No, that's a fact. And that's why this is what they offer. And based on what Annie just sent us, it's understandable. So, I hear you saying, for Carrie.
This is, I see, before Bakari go in, I wanted to say, too, also, this comes from a tremendous amount of greed, also, the slavery, according to this book here, having enough hands to hold the extra 10,000 tobacco hills were paramount, you know, because once they start, it's like anything else. I would think even like the cocaine fields and stuff like that. Once you create a market for that, and they created this market for tobacco in Europe and everything, you know, they was getting rich. They was, and their greed blinded them. They was getting rich head over heels, raping the land of the natural resource, and tobacco was one of the natural resources there in the land. And so how they use their judicial system to justify enslaving the people so that they can have free labor, and we see it today, so that they can have free labor in order to create further profit, it just became paramount to them and to continue to greed. And we say it all the time now. You know, they know it's getting desperate here, but for years they've been feeding their children, sending them off to college at Steetnine State. You know, that a lot of them don't want to stop it.
No,
a lot of them don't want to stop it.
What would they do? How would they feed themselves if they didn't continue to infringe upon your liberty, which of course we know is travel, like travel. You know, how would they feed themselves? This is what we have to really think about, but we can still break it down once we have knowledge of it and be able to effectuate, you know, what needs to be done. But you cannot do it if you don't have knowledge of what is really, really going on. You have to identify, you know, and this is helping to identify that, you know.
Oh, absolutely. And also we see, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Also we see today in the penal system, and you see there with the system that they created back then, and it's still going on now. All right, and so we have to keep that focus in our mind that it was going on then and it's going on now. You know, where somebody is kidnapped, they gets in prison, and then they get sentenced to whatever time, 5 years, 10 years. You incarcerated, you get in a fight. Now you go between the board say, okay, now they know they making money off of keeping you incarcerated. So now,
right.
you go to the board and they say, okay, we're going to add 2 more years onto your sentence because of bad conduct or this and that. Just come out of thin air, creating and extending time. And we see in here where that practice was started here on the continent, when the Europeans came here, and they continued that practice, of just issuing out time for anything, a cracked light, they accost you on the highway, and we see these words back then through the highwaymen. They accost you on the highway, kidnap you for a cracked light, saying that once they accost you, you was unruly or a resurrection or something, and then they want to charge fiat or incarcerate you to make money off of you, and then just keep you there for a crack. Like we see it then, and we see these things now, and he's in his writing, he's just doing it so clearly so that you can understand and see this here. This is how they treated them, and this is how they're treating us. They treated their own people this way, and it just continued.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. If you before I think Bakari, you had something to say, because then after that I want to go into the school.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, though, what he is saying, instead of forcing themselves into an army, however, the rebels turned themselves into religious debating societies. And it's interesting because I just did something on the religious. And so that's part of all of this as well. And I see some of that in this. They brought all of that in the religious controversy, So
a mother Rose.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm having a little difficulty, like hearing you, like you're coming in a little clouded.
I am.
A little. That.
Well, it's got to be my piece. Does it sound better now at all?
Yeah, a little bit better.
I might have to get, if I don't come, well, it's going. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I didn't hear that last sentence. I didn't hear the entire last sentence that you spoke.
Oh, I was just saying that, in tying up what he's saying about the religion, it says instead of forcing themselves into an army, however, the rebels turned themselves into a religious debating society. Religion. Yeah. But go ahead. You have the comment.
No, I wanted to make a couple of quick comments and or observations based on that system of based on the system or of slavery. It seems to me that it is a perpetual system for war, or a perpetual system for antagonistic behavior. I mean, there is nothing good that comes out of it. History has shown that. And so I just wanted to, say that, quickly, because now you have individuals who have descendants. And, at some point, if they aren't brainwashed, if they aren't made tractable, as the term that was utilized, I forget which page it was on, but that was the page when it mentioned in 1640. I took some quick notes about Hugh Gwynn, and it said that chains, or that correct quote, that would save him the extra expense of bringing them back in chains and produce enough cash to purchase more tractable servants. Tractable servants meaning those type of servants or slaves that are easily managed, a person or animal easy to control. And unless you have that type of individual, you're always going to have a war at some point. You're always going to have a rebellion. You're always going to have a conflict. So now, as time passes and the numbers of the enslaved and, Slavs who are brought over continue to grow, it becomes more and more important or feasible by the planter, the slave master, etc., to ensure that you beat the hell out of your slave so that you can control him or you can control her. And so there is it doesn't surprise me that in our families today and in many nations today, it's common practice to beat the hell out of your children because they didn't wash the dishes or because they didn't do this, because they didn't do that. That's a learned behavior. Because if you beat an animal, even like a dog, like if you beat an animal constantly for stuff that, it's not sensible, just for little stupid things that you yourself as a human, can work around, that animal is going to run away. That animal is going to take off. But after generations of generations, now you see where now you have individuals who now have taken on the persona of the slave master. Now you have the individuals who are taking on the persona of the individuals who are in power. And this, to me, is another great example, and I don't mean to deviate, but this is another great example of why we have so many of our people globally who are bleaching their skin, who are wearing weaves, blonde weaves, and gray contacts now. It's not because they're bad people. Yeah, exactly.
It's in the psyche. Hold on a moment. It looks like someone else wants to join the conversation.
Yeah, that was a good point, though.
That is a very good point. That is a very good point. I want to bring up about the dragoons also. Hold on, let me see who this one is. 808-223. You're live. Are you joining this conversation? 808.
This is RVBey. Can you hear me?
How are you? Yes.
Very well. Things are peaceful. Long-time listener, first-time call-in, and by birth, Moor. I just wanted to thank everyone on the panel and say that the effort that you guys have put through is life-changing and life-saving worldwide for all Moors.
Oh, wow.
My comment was on White Cargo. I kind of hope that the panel will allow me a little lenience. I was trying to bring this back of White Cargo. There are a lot of points that you brought up over the multiple chapters that we've read so far on the show that tie back to like Ancient and Modern Britons by David McRitchie. And if I could, I'd like to just read something short out of Volume 1, page 233.
All right.
David McRitchie states, in short, ever since the overthrow of black nobility in 1455, or to go further back, ever since the 10th century, when a white king displaced a black one on the Pictish throne, knowing that Picts are Moors. Those Moors who refused to accept the laws of the new civilization and refrained from mixing their bloods with that of the white race have been sinking lower and lower in the social scale. Until the 16th century, they have become outlawed banditti or bandits, also mossers or moss troopers or gypsies. I mentioned that to go to page 234 that covers the Act of 1609. And this is from an article, news article of the time, that he cited in, again, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1, page 234. The Act of 1609 deals with common thieves, commonly called Egyptians, and 3 years later, the king entered into a contract with the clan Scott and their friends, by which the clan bound themselves to give up all bands of friendship, kindness, oversight, maintenance, or assurance, if any, we have with common thieves and broken clans and company. Basically, that's the news article. The prophet had told us that what's the strongest weapon that we possibly have? Newspapers. It's communications, because you can drive the thought of people who may not be in the know, because they may overhear conversations in passing in their day-to-day lives that draws or a mental picture of what something they may not know of personally. I go to there to come back to finish off where I left off on page 236, same chapter of Ancient Modern Britons, Volume 1. The opinion, which has been generally supported and prevails at present time, is that the word originally sheikh, spelled Sharkeyn, an Arabian word signifying Eastern people, and used in contradiction to Maghreb, or Western people, the Moors of Morocco. For those who may be new, we know Morocco, we're standing on it. It's north, central, south, and surrounding islands. What we now call America, the continent of America. Now, with that being said, I also want to just make one more comment with the religious aspect of what we've been covering so far in White Cargo. Brother Abdul Mosley Bey put out a book, Moors and Masonry, not that long ago. I finished that book a while back. One of the great pieces or great jewels that he dropped in there was that any church on this land that you see that has the name Redemption, Redeemer, or any hospital that's associated with any type of Christian that has that key phrase, key word in it. The reason why it has that key phrase of redemption or redeemer, we're not talking about souls and getting out of hell, this, that, and the other. We know hell is just the excrement chamber of the kings, underneath the king's throne. It's talking about redeeming the souls of the slaves, the white cargo that were taken by the Moors, called corsairs, and getting them back. So it was the clergy that ran around the planet trying to raise up nickels, dimes, pennies, pences, using their monetary systems to try to redeem back those that were captured. With that, I give the floor.
Islam, thank you for your input on that. That makes a lot of sense because, as you know, I just did. That's why when I was saying the religious part, it was just interesting to me because I just did some studies with that. And the reality is this: just as what we're reading now, they are the original slaves. They were born that way, and when they created or established the Christian religion, was based on them trying to free themselves, quite frankly, and had the freedom of religion. And from that, that was a milestone for them when they got the Edict of Milan that said, all right, you can now, have your religion of choice. But that was a milestone for them because in the end, when it was all done, they made their Christian decree, which is government. And that's really what it is. It's interesting he should say that because I never thought about the Redeemer. And, of course, they're redeeming themselves because they are the original slaves. Now, the sad part is that we think that it has something to do with our salvation when it's clearly stated in the Prophet Book, chapter 46 of the 77 Holy Quran that was established for their earthly salvation. So it's kind of mixed up in here. But I'm really, this chapter, when they start talking about the religion, it's the same story, just repeated over. The history does repeat itself. And I tell you one thing for certain, it does not matter what we go through in terms of, them coming over as slaves, them trying to be free as slaves, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, all of this, they still maintain. Oh, and let me not forget the Anti-Catholic. They still maintain their steadfast position as Brother said, of redeeming, based on exactly like what Sister Annie said, because they don't want to return to that status, but they want to be redeemed from it, as the brother just shared with us. So these establishments, these Christian establishments, including the schools, the heart are really for the redeeming of them. This is what makes it so sad that we don't know this. And as you said, getting the information out is important so we can what? Take our place amongst the affairs of man. That's for them to be redeemed, and for us to think that we're going to find something in that. Back to slavery, which is inhumane, and again, why the prophet said everybody has precedent. Here we are telling that story. It's been told by books. This is just like cargo. There's several out now. So they were written a while back. So these are the accounts of white slavery. Of course, they're not going to put that in any shape, form, or fashion in the public schools that, you and your children go to. Because the one thing for certain is this information is not what they want to be widely known amongst, particularly amongst Moors, particularly because we are the ones that had been enslaved and that they fear. Even though it was the British on the other side, it still was Moors who were dark melanated beings. And so, of course, it's how we have to know the history in order to, take our place. We really do. So I thank the brother for sharing that. It's really right.
I want to say Islam to the brother too. Excuse me. And I think Bakari got cut out. Is he still in the queue?
I don't see Bakari and the brother that was just speaking. He didn't have to hang up. He just had to press 1, and he's going also. So if he's gone, he can't hear what's being said now regarding his comments. He may have hung up instead of pressing 1.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And Bakari, but here's the deal. Bakari won't be able to get back in unless he come back with you, because I can't hear it. He won't be able to get back in at this hour because we're coming up to the close. I wanted to mention, is there anything else you wanted to mention here? Because I wanted to bring a thought here. 2 things, really.
I just wanted to thank the brother. I just want to thank the brother who called in. He might can't hear it, but it's on the record anyway. Appreciate his call in. I would like him to call in more often, too. It'd be nice to hear his perspective for where he went with that.
Yes. So, that was great. And so I wanted to say, because in this one in the chapter here, and I should have highlighted while I read it, but they had mentioned the divine rights of kings. They were arguing with each other, you know what I'm saying? And, about the religion and all that. And then somewhere it mentioned the divine rights of kings, but I just want to give a definition of that so we can clarify. The theory of the divine rights of kings is the right of a king to rule as posited by the patriarchal theory of government. Let's see, so fine, give him a call. The divine right, give him a call, 719, you got the number. The right of a king to rule as posited by the patriarchal theory of government, especially under the doctrine that no misconduct and no dispossession can forfeit the right of monarch or his heirs to the throne and to the obedience of the people. this theory was in its origins directed not against popular liberty, but against Pascal and ecclesiastical claims to supremacy in temporal as well as spiritual affairs. So that's what they were trying to hold on to and still do to this day. But we know better than that because it's about bloodline in terms of the right, the divine right. This is something they made out posited by the patriarchal theory, which would absolutely be Christianity, because Christianity is no diggity, no doubt. I will be the one to shout, patriarchal. Oh, I
no diggity, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
all right,
point.
So hold on. I think Kari's back in. Let me. I don't see a press one. Oh, I do. Hold on a moment.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you there?
Yes.
I haven't even finished twirling into. But as long as we can hear you, that's all that matters. Oh yeah, I see what happens. It's already done. All right, so I'm glad that you're here. Did you have any comments so far? I know you dropped out for a second, but you're back. That's great. Yes, already done.
Well, I'm thankful to be back. I'm thankful to be back, and I was not able to hear all of the new caller, the last caller that came in. I wasn't able to hear all of his. I dropped off while he was speaking, but I did want to make a comment about. I don't want to jump tracks, so to speak, because of losing the connection. But I wanted to bring to the. Well, actually, while I was gone, I was thinking about, the mechanism by which white cargo and all of this activity against various nationalities were able to function. What was, I was essentially thinking, what were the mechanisms that were put in place or that were already in place that allowed this activity to flourish over time? What were those mechanisms, and are they still functioning today? And
wow.
one of the,
No, go ahead and finish what you're saying, because I think I have an answer to that.
Yeah.
Those mechanisms.
Yeah, and
mechanisms. Go ahead.
No, because one of the things that struck me, like you got to look at, or rather, that I looked at was, there are many things that take place from the individuals that are charged with managing the slaves or the enslaved, and all the way up to the individuals who are the supposed sovereigns, heads of state, kings, queens, etc. Privy councils, and then of course one of the biggest guns, if not the biggest guns, is the church. Or that religious aspect. The courier, and Taj Tariq-Bey came to mind immediately in terms of when he gives a lecture on the influence of the church throughout history, and one of the things at the lowest levels within the reading was how the runaways were treated when they were captured, and immediately, and I forget where it was located or what page it was on, but it stated that immediately upon their capture they were beaten harshly, whipped severely, and that is the same type of activity. 163. Okay, and that's the exact same type of activity that we see today by the so-called cop or the so-called officer on the street.
I thought of that too. I was thinking that in my mind as well. Bakari, they're still doing it. It's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me just say this. When you mentioned the church, listen, we can deal with talking about the church and their involvement, but what we need to really know is that the Christian church were nothing but slaves fighting themselves for religious rights, for freedom through religious rights. That's who they were. That's who they are. That's something that I know most people don't know, because I even asked people who were in the church being devout, and they did not know that Christians were persecuted. They didn't know that they had to be. Constantine started that Christian religion, but they were slaves. Just as the same as repeating itself. Slaves. And when they started the Christian religion, their decree is governed. They have decreed themselves as governed. And to this day, the Christian church, it's a government. That's what their decree reads as. Now, when they did get their freedom, it's funny how, although they were persecuted for even thinking about starting the Christian religion, and then they argued and fought with each other about things such as, the Trinity, which is God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, that he just appeared, knowing that he came out of the womb of a woman, but they were Xing out all things that related to matriarch. Absolutely, that's what the Christian church did. It is documented. They even changed the calendar from the lunar to the solar. Another way of Xing out the woman who vibrates on it's called quarter decimal, and it dealt with the celebration of Easter or Esther or Astarte or Ishtar or Maya or Libra or Venus, all the same thing as the mother. So yeah, they have not. When you see them out there beating somebody with a club, they are simply, and hear me clearly, practicing their religion. And I had someone tell me that several years ago, and I didn't understand what they were saying. I didn't quite get it, but I have endeavored to get it now. That is what they are doing because, and he said, why? Because they don't want to go back to that state that they were in, wherein they fought to get their religious freedom, and from that they have their government. It is called the government. And in it, anything that you pay to is vindicated to what? The Moorish houses, which is the Roman thing. I'm telling you, it's the most amazing thing to know. And then for us to think that we are party to that is why the prophet wrote what he wrote. He said the first church, Christianity started in Rome. The first church was built in Rome. That's all he said. That's just that one line means so much more when you really go find out that in fact it was and how it was. But again, we're talking about the original tribes. We're talking about they were the original slaves. We're talking about the fact that they had to fight a persecution by the imperial divine, which is Moorish, and by each other, and that they actually used the so-called named Jews to do the actual persecution. This was before Christianity even got started, which is 325 AD, which was after the death of Yeshua. But they used the Jews to persecute, to actually murder Yeshua. But the Jews were nothing but us, and you must equate them to the infiltrators today, okay? Or the Moriscos of the 14th century or whatever like that. Okay? That's what you must equate them to. In history, repeats itself because we don't know. And what they do is they convolute it, and they tell you, do not question the word of God, because as far as they're concerned, that their Christian religion, and the Bible is, was written by God and all that. Because if you question it, you would discover the truth, which is written, already recorded about the fact that that's just smoke screen to keep you from knowing that the Christian religion was slaves. And again, we say that their intent to remain free is based on the fact that they don't want to go back to that status they fought very, 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 very hard for that status. They don't want to go back there. So we may be dealing with the Christian religion thinking that we're good Christians, and we're not. We're actually under their government. It's their actual decree is government. Their government. But, yeah. So I was going to say to you that what got it all started really from this book right here. It says a place for the unwanted. They were unwanted. You know, the whole thing that got it started is right here from the time of when we established them. Somebody has some noise in the back. We established them period, and then they were existing, but they were unwanted. Because as Annie said, I believe either from this book or the other book, the first time she read a chapter or two from another book, and that chapter or two, I can't remember the name of it, but it's in the record, the archives. It just blatantly just let you know the condition and how there were so many of them and how they just didn't know what to do. So yes, they were called the unwanted. So chapter 1 of this book starts with a place for the unwanted. That's how it got, done.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are today. But what I found is I wanted to mention. I don't think the mention of the whipping was 163. 163 is a memorable page because that's where they're talking about the dragoons and how the Moors, and they use the word Moor, and I'm going to read that. The place about the beatings and stuff is more at the end of 10, and I guess that starts, that's important because that's when they started the whipping, and then as Sim said, your point about the mentality of beating really doesn't belong to us. It belongs to their mindset, their ideology of thinking. You know what I mean? And theirs is, it's about place, So it's interesting because this is social engineering that, yes, sir.
Oh, and I want to say, if the listeners been following us since the beginning of White Cargo, and they really, really has been following RVBey and work that you've been putting in about the Constitution, the whole year that you put in, they understand why it was a need to civilize these people and why it was a need for the Constitution, the organic Constitution, to be even created. Because you was bringing up, they started these religious, what did you call them? The religious groups. All right.
Oh,
you're seeing the religious, what you call them? The religious groups that they started up. We see now. Right, the religious debate groups and stuff like that. We see that the Constitution, and we even understand that with us, as Moors and Moors Americans, the protection with the Constitution protecting the religious rights. All right, so we see why we needed, how this evolved, and they needed that, and our forefathers and foremothers knew that they needed that protection for themselves and for us. All right. Yeah. So, as you go on with that religious thing. Mm-hmm.
But Sam, I have to say this: what is such the hypocrisy is that although these slaves, these modern Europeans, we call today erroneously white people, who originally slaves, although they fought for the religious freedom, the hypocrisy is they turn right around and won't allow or snitch at you if you say, well, you're religious, unless, that's what they try to do. So when you have knowledge, you are what you know, and you know how to get around that. But Not only do they do that today, they did that immediately in their decree, in the Christian decree. It said, "Oh, we understand that some people have been are being forced to follow other religions or alien superstitions." And they had such the nerve to say that. You know what I mean? After they just got their religious freedom. And then they say in it, and guess what they say in it? They say in it that if you do that, you will be beaten with a stick. Can you believe it? Like, really?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a part of your decree after you just got your daggone religious freedom, and because someone else may not subscribe to it, if they're in your court government, because they specifically say that, then they can be beaten? Are you serious? I mean, really? So that's the hypocrisy of it. So that's more of a reason why it was. No, here's what it says. Whereas we have learned that certain ecclesiastics and others devoting their service to the church have been compelled by men of different religions. Now, please understand that they just won their position to exercise their religion, called Christianity, which is patriarchal. All right? So it says, others devoting their services to the church have been compelled by men of different religions to the performance of lustful sacrifices. We decree by this section that if any person should suppose that those who devote their services to the most sacred law may be forced to the ritual of an alien superstition, that's what they call it, they shall be beaten publicly with clubs, provided that his legal status so permits. If, however, the consideration of his honorable rank protects him from such an outrage, he shall sustain the penalty of a very heavy fine, which shall be vindicated to the municipality. Let me tell you something. They're still practicing their religion today, okay? Under our government, the Christian religion is a government. We are so fooled. So fooled. That is why Prophet Muhammad said that is for their earthly salvation, not yours. But not straying away from this, because this particular chapter started talking about the religious. As I said, they began, the rebels turned themselves into religious debating society. They're talking about this religion thing. They have always been dealing with that. They know that the religion is the freedom. This is why you have so many sects or sectalisms, as they say, in even Christianity, but I don't care how many you have. What the people need to know is that Christianity is a patriarchal religion, period. Period. A government, really, period. Period. And it is recorded as such. There is no debate about that. None at all. So, now, and again, they keep on doing the hypocrisy on you. How does it repeat itself? Okay, so you read the Benjamin Banneker letter where we were helping them out for their freedom, right? We're helping them for their freedom, and what are they doing? They're looking at an eye on how to enslave us. That just help them. Okay? This is just, again, back to what we were saying. Right? I mean, it is their nature. It is who they are. That is it, and that is all. What we need to do is find our place amongst the affairs of man, period. Without always, trying to figure out what they're doing, who they are. We are getting the origins of who they are through this book, through the religious piece, granting the Christianity piece. We are getting it by study. And so this study should help us to take our place amongst the affairs of man, which is what we are directed to do, and stop hanging on the bootstraps and the straps of a people who are the original slaves, who are based in a religious, patriarchal government, which is against nature and the matriarch. So this is what I would trust that this will help us to Islam to that. Islam to that. But I want to, now, because we don't have too much time, but let's just mention this, and I want people to think, want y'all to give a thought on this or think about it for next time. In 1679, a troop of dragoons was dispatched sounds like goons. That's where they get the word goons from. Dragoons was dispatched to disperse a large conventicle reported. Now, conventicle means people, it's from convention, but it's a bunch of people hanging on the corner type thing, right, today. They converted that language to use military, okay? A large conventicle reported to be mustering outside Kilmarnock in Ayrshire. When the dragoons reached the spot that intelligence had indicated, a foggy moor called Drumclog, they were met by a large religious congregation protected by 250 armed men. The Covenanters were ready for trouble, armed with an array of weapons ranging from muskets to pitchforks. They managed to see off the dragoons, who found themselves mired in the boggy ground. Okay? Now, hold on.
Yeah.
We're going to have to look up who drums. I know somebody got to be on it.
What was that about the? Did you say something about the dragoon?
The dragoon was dispatched
right.
to where the.
Yeah, that's allow me. That's a military unit. Essentially, it's either mounted cavalry or infantry.
All right. Thank you for that. And that's interesting because they were dispatched where there were some people that were gathered together. But when they got there, right, a Moor called Drumclog, so we're going to have to look up, research Drumclog. They were met by a large religious congregation protected by 250 armed men. So they left. But thanks for clarifying what the dragoon is, because I'm thinking of, most of the people in the mafia, or whatever they call people goons. You know what I mean?
No, that's a element. Me being a veteran, I would know that because. But I just did a quick search while you were speaking, and it states a member of any of several cavalry regiments in the British Army.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, and but and it could also be infantry as well.
All right, so now let me read. Let me read this again. Maybe Drumclog was some more. Let's read this. When the dragoons reached the spot that intelligence had indicated, a boggy moor called Drumclog. That could be the intelligence part of the dragoons. I'm not sure now. They were met by a large religious congregation protected by 250 armed men. We're going to look into that section right there. That's the end of 10 and see what we can dig up. And dig up Drumclog and see who that is, and then we can better know whether Drumclog was the dragoon, which is the infantry, British at that, which would be a British Moor, or whether he was the one who was the head of the conventioners that boarded off the dragoons because they had 250 armed men, and they said that this was the catalyst by which many more people took to arms. Interesting, and I think with that, it's time to any last comments because we only have about 7 more minutes, and we have to say good night, and we will see you here Tuesday. I did make one mistake. Next Wednesday, we're not in New York physically. It's the following. We're there the 2nd and the 3rd. So, any last comments from you two, Brother Tim and Brother Bakari?
Oh, I wanted to make a comment that struck me real. That Ray the antennas, and it says these laws left black freemen like Johnson still free, but they were no longer treated like other planters. They could still buy black servants, but they were barred from buying white servants. In 1671, another measure made all non-Christian servants into Virginia slaves for life. Now, this part really raised the antennas. Okay, this part really raised the antennas. Non-Christian meant African.
You're breaking up.
That? Oh, man. Can you hear me?
You're breaking. We can hear you, but you're breaking up.
Oh, okay, I don't know why it's breaking up. But I was asking, do you remember reading that part? Because it really let it stand still for me. It said non-Christians meant African.
I'm partially hearing you because you really are breaking up pretty badly on this last stuff, but something about...
All right, so I yield the floor.
Yeah. Bakari, are you familiar with what he's saying exactly? Do you know what he's saying about this?
No, I could intermittently hear him. He was really breaking up a lot.
Yeah, but I do remember something. Yeah. At the end of the thing, we'll bring that up next time to cap up, if you will, because I do remember reading something about Christians, and I should have highlighted it. Because when you're reading, you're just reading, and your mind highlights it, but you don't highlight it with the yellow pen. So therefore, you can't go back to it. And I was trying to take notes on things. So, Carl, do you have any last words before we?
No. Well, yes. I just wanted to say thank you, and I wanted to just share with the listeners that for me, and I've had conversations with you, Mother Roz and Anna Eid and Brother Hassim, and I just wanted to share that, for me, this is not, just in case any of the listeners are under the impression that this is just a bunch of Moors who are just hating on Europeans and stuff like that and all that. That's not what this is about. This is about us as Aboriginal and Indigenous people who have gone through many generations of disinformation, misinformation, enslavement. We're just trying to find ourselves, honor our foremothers and forefathers, and being able to practice our nationality, our culture, our creed, and that's why we're doing this, so that we can have answers and so that we can move forward and be able to pass something other than clothing on to our next generation. Though we are Aboriginal and Indigenous, we don't, across this entire planet, we don't have land that we are in control of, and so, and that is a crime, and that needs to be addressed, and that's one of the reasons I think that we are doing this, Islam.
Exactly, and that comes with our claim of who we are, and you can only be what you know. And so it's about study, so that particular situation about claim. This is why the prophet said, "You are rich, my children, you are rich." We just have not been in the title in which we are have dominion over, which we do have dominion over the land. We have not been in the quote status of that, and again, it's hard to be that if you don't have knowledge. And you're right. This is what all this information is about, so that our children that come through to the next generations will walk right into what is already divinely unalienable and inalienably by birth theirs, because they're born onto, out of the mother's womb and onto this earth of which they converse on, and which is their dominion, as much as it is the fish and the any other aboriginal, organic, animal, mammal, whatever on this land. There is no reason for anyone to try to claim liberty over another being and over the land, because nobody's taking it with them. And it cannot be bought, it cannot be sold, and it cannot be transferred. So therefore, when we take our place amongst the affairs of man, I know for sure that it will all be all right in the in the not end, because when you're at the end, you're at the beginning. And that's what